From Colby calling the sport a playground for UFC dropouts, to pro fighters making the move to BKFC for the big bucks, here's why Colby Covington slammed BKFC. In a recent interview with James Lynch, he trolled BKFC saying that the sport is only for UFC washouts. MMA has been taking the world of sports by storm, and bare-knuckle fighting is quickly following the same footprint. But the next UFC welterweight contender, Colby Covington, is definitely not a fan of the sport. Now, Colby might be one of the most famous welterweights in the UFC, but he's even more well known for his controversial opinions on almost everything. This time, Chaos dissed the bare-knuckle fighting championship, calling it a playground for UFC washouts, fighters who couldn't make it to the big leagues. Now, I know that probably doesn't make a lot of sense, because bare-knuckle sounds way more brutal than pro fighting. The name alone sends chills down your spine. But Colby isn't totally wrong here, because BKFC fights are entirely different from the octagon. In the UFC, fighters use all sorts of tactics, like side kicks, grapples, knees, elbows, you name it. It's like a chess match. And the key goal is to outsmart your opponent. Just look at Volkanovski and Holloway. Volkanovski beat Holloway 3 consecutive times, even though he's a whole 5 inches shorter. And how'd he do that? It's simple. He used his head more than his fists. So it's stuff like that, where fighters need a lot more than thunder punches. But here's the catch. It's really tough to think straight when your head is getting caved in. Most amateur fighters can only try to hit without getting hit. They never make it to the big leagues because they lack that special sauce. And that's when they turn to BKFC, because even Joe Rogan has said that bare-knuckle fighting is actually safer than fighting with gloves. Or, in other words, if you're scared of getting your head crushed, BKFC might be the place for you, because there are zero tactics in bare-knuckle fighting. It's all about swinging toothless punches. I mean, who in their right mind would smack someone's skull with their bare hands? They'd just end up breaking their knuckles, because nerd alert, your skull bones are much harder than your hand bones. That said, it makes sense that fighters who couldn't do well in the UFC would switch to bare-knuckle fighting. But Chaos had even harsher words for BKFC than UFC washouts, because he compared them to Indian Fairgrounds fighters. Now, Colby might have been right about bare-knuckle fighters not having the same level of skills as the UFC, but calling them Indian Fairground fighters is way out of line. Not only is it a huge insult to BKFC, it's also a negative stereotype for the Native Americans, which is totally uncalled for, because bare-knuckle fighting was seen as a savage and brutal sport, and it's only recently that BKFC has gained so much promotion. That said, it's also demeaning to BKFC fighters, because there are former UFC champs and top-tier fighters from all over the MMA world over there too. But even that doesn't impress Colby, because when asked for his comments on BKFC's biggest event yet, Colby said that he's never watched a single bare-knuckle fight. Honestly, I actually feel bad for him. He's missing out on some epic action, like BKFC 41, which was off the charts. It was Mike Platinum Perry going head-to-head against former UFC middleweight champ Luke Rockhold. Yep, you heard that right, a former UFC champ in the bare-knuckle ring. And although Perry was also a welterweight in the UFC, he didn't come close to a title in his 15 fights in the octagon. Yet, he humiliated Luke, who despite being a UFC champ, lost to Perry in only 2 rounds. And trust me guys, he didn't go down in a classy way. Platinum literally knocked his teeth out in under 4 minutes. I mean, that's hard proof that BKFC fighters are no less talented than the UFC, but Chaos still isn't interested in watching the sport, because apart from its UFC washouts and Indian Fairground fighters, Colby believes that his time would be well spent on the biggest and best business and the biggest and best fights. And that's only in the UFC. It's the best organization in the world. Well, Chaos, I got news for you, cause BKFC just reached a new high when Conor McGregor stepped in the ring at BKFC 41. The fight between Perry and Rockhold was BKFC's main event, with Perry coming out on top with a ruthless TKO. But Platinum's celebration was shadowed by UFC's main man himself, Conor McGregor, who came to watch the show and even got into the ring and confronted Perry. Now, we all know the notorious Loves drama, and he's well known for challenging every guy that he runs into. But his run-in with Platinum could be a lot more than his usual antics, cuz McGregor commented on his appearance in BKFC on his Instagram and dropped some hints about being hyped for bare-knuckle boxing, especially against Perry. The Irish is always hungry for a challenge, and he might just be ready to drop the gloves. But the 2-division champ isn't the only one looking to ditch the gloves, because Chris Cyborg has also hinted at joining BKFC. Cyborg has conquered almost every combat sport in her 20-year career, from the UFC to Bellator, Invicta FC, and Strikeforce. She's been crowned the champ everywhere, but she hasn't stepped foot in BKFC yet. It seems very likely though, cuz throughout her years in the MMA world, The Brazilian has claimed 20 KOs out of her 26 wins, all by her destructive striking power, which is exactly why she believes she could set BKFC on fire. But what caught her attention was in fact BFKC 41. She actually tweeted right after the match, "Okay, after watching that fight at BKFC 41, maybe I need one bare-knuckle boxing fight before I retire." So the Platinum vs. Rockhold fight, that was just a waste of time for Chaos, has convinced two of UFC's greatest fighters to give BKFC a shot. But she's asked for a boxing coach in her corner. And spoiler alert, it's not a UFC champ. She wants BKFC legend Mike Perry himself. So much for being a UFC washout. Cuz Platinum has become a much bigger star than he could have ever imagined with the UFC, to the point that even a legend like Cyborg wants to learn Platinum's bare-knuckle secrets. But apart from Cyborg and McGregor, there's a whole army of UFC fighters looking to switch to BKFC. It's no secret that bare-knuckle fighting's popularity is rising in the fighting world, mainly for two reasons. First, the fans are starving for more blood in the ring. And compared to the UFC and Bellator, BKFC might not be as polished and professional, but it's definitely messier. But hey, the fans want what they want, and BKFC is giving them exactly what they came for. Secondly, the bare-knuckle sport has been around since 2018, but they failed to get enough promotions because of amateur fighters. Cause let's be real, a bunch of nobodies knocking each other's teeth out wasn't gonna generate any buzz. But recently, a lot of big names have joined the boxing promotion, especially fighters who'd already made a name for themselves in the UFC have jumped ship like Mike Perry and former middleweight champ Luke Rockhold. And Luke isn't even the only former champ in the BKFC roster. Eddie Alvarez, the former UFC lightweight champ, also switched to gloveless boxing. And it's not just champions, there's former contenders in BKFC too. Take John Dodson, who had a shot at the UFC flyweight title, and Chad Mendes, the former featherweight contender. On the women's side, Paige Van Zandt, one of the most famous flyweights in the UFC, made the bold move to bare-knuckle boxing in 2020, only to be followed by Rachel Ostovich, another flyweight. Now you might wonder, why are these pro fighters joining BKFC? Especially when there are much bigger companies out there. Well, it's actually pretty simple, because bare knuckle pays a hell of a lot more. If you've been following MMA for a while, you'd know that Bellator, PFL, and ONE FC all find themselves fighting for the scraps off UFC's table. It's mostly old fighters, or those who couldn't make a big name for themselves. But out of nowhere, BKFC, which everyone, including Colby Covington, thought of as a wild circus, has started snatching famous names from different promotions. But it's only because they're offering big bucks to take off the gloves. And Van Zandt is one of their most rewarded fighters. In an interview with The Sun, Paige revealed the pay difference, saying that she got 40 grand to show and 40 to win in the UFC, while in BKFC, she's getting 10 times more. Plus, her contract with BKFC for only 4 fights was reported to be a multi-million-dollar deal. And she isn't the only one stacking her wallet, because Chad Mendes has claimed that he's going to out-earn what the UFC heavyweight champion Ngannou was paid for his title defense, which was a cool $600,000. Even Platinum is more than happy throwing bear punches, because he has claimed that he makes more than twice what he got in the octagon. Well, this just proves that money talks, and BKFC is all about the Benjamins. So, from pro fighters making the move to BKFC for the big bucks, to Colby calling the sport a playground for UFC dropouts. This was why Colby Covington slammed BKFC.